The first thing Jayla Monroe did was reach for her bouquet, not because she needed to hold it, but because she needed something to anchor her hands while the rest of her threatened to completely fall apart. The chapel was everything she had asked for. Soft ivory candles lining every pew, white roses cascading from wrought iron arches, a string quartet in the corner playing something slow and dignified, the kind of music that was supposed to make a woman feel like she was walking toward forever. Jayla had spent 6 months planning this day. She had chosen the flowers herself, approved the seating chart herself, cried happy tears at the final dress fitting, alone, the way she did most things, and told herself, with the kind of conviction that only comes from years of practicing it, that this was what she wanted. Julian was a good man. He was steady. He would never leave her in the middle of the night without a single word of explanation. She was 30 seconds away from saying, "I do," when the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel didn't open. They were shoved apart. The quartet stopped mid-note. 300 guests turned in their seats, a collective gasp pulling the oxygen right out of the room. Jayla's eyes lifted from Julian's face, and everything inside her went completely still. Because standing at the far end of the aisle, with the terrifying and unhurried grace of a man who had never once in his life arrived anywhere he wasn't absolutely certain he was supposed to be, was Chin Hai. He was different. Of course he was. 7 years had a way of doing things to people. But the version of him she had locked behind every wall she ever built had not prepared her for this. The sharp, lean boy she had fallen for in the quiet of a late-night office had been replaced by something the world had carved into something far more dangerous. His suit was charcoal, perfectly cut, expensive in the way that didn't announce itself. His jaw was set like a verdict. His expression was the specific kind of calm that Jayla had only ever seen on people who had learned, at extreme personal cost, to give absolutely nothing away. His men, a dozen of them, spread silently through the back of the chapel, positioning themselves at every exit. Not threatening, just present. The way a locked door is present. And then, Chin Hai's eyes found her. The quartet stayed silent. The guests stayed frozen. The world continued on its ordinary schedule and cared nothing for the fact that Jayla Monroe had just forgotten how to breathe. For one long, suspended moment, they looked at each other across 300 witnesses and 7 years of unsaid things. Something moved across his face, brief, barely visible, a fracture in the composure, and then it was sealed back down, locked beneath the surface like it had never existed. But she had seen it. She had always been too good at reading him. Then her eyes dropped, because his had. Standing beside the bridesmaids in the front row, in a tiny black tuxedo with a slightly crooked tie, was Kaylin, 7 years old. Deep brown skin, her cheekbones, her stubbornness in every line of his small body. And Chin Hai's jaw. Chin Hai's exact razor-sharp jawline, so precise it looked deliberate, like God had made a point. Chin Hai's gaze stayed on Kaylin for exactly 3 seconds. When he looked back up at Jayla, the composure was still there, but something underneath it had shifted completely. She could see it the way you feel a pressure change before a storm. The air in the chapel was different now. Every person in that room could feel it without being able to name it. He walked down the center aisle, slowly, deliberately. Every step measured like a man who had rehearsed the exact weight of this moment. He stopped 10 feet from the altar. He did not look at Julian. He did not acknowledge the gasping guests, the frozen officiant, or the phone cameras rising from every pew. His dark eyes were on Jayla only, and in a voice low enough that it should not have carried, but somehow did, reaching every corner of that silent chapel, Chin Hai said, "You are wearing white for the wrong man." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Jayla had ever heard, because the worst part, the part she would spend the next 24 hours hating herself for, was that some traitorous, bone-deep part of her already knew he was right. 7 years ago, Chin Hai was her boss. Her brilliant, obsessive, infuriatingly private boss. The kind of man who worked past midnight and never once explained himself to anyone, including her. She had been 23, ambitious, and completely unprepared for what it would feel like when a man like that decided she was the only person worth paying attention to. She had fallen, completely, without a single reservation, and then, on a Tuesday morning in November, she had woken up alone. No note, no call, no forwarding address. Just Ishi's resignation letter from his assistant and a company-issued car she hadn't asked for, waiting in her parking spot. She had found out she was pregnant 12 days later. She had survived it the way women survive impossible things. One decision at a time, one wall at a time, one ordinary Tuesday at a time, until surviving quietly became living, and living became something she was almost proud of. And now he was here, standing 10 feet from her altar, looking at her like she was the only coordinates he had ever navigated toward. And the 7-year-old boy in the front row with his father's jawline was looking between them both, holding a tiny ring pillow and completely unaware that his entire world was about to change. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Jayla moved before she thought about it. She grabbed Chin Hai by the sleeve, his very expensive, very calm sleeve, and pulled. Hard. The grip she used was not polite. It was the grip of a woman who had rehearsed this conversation 10,000 times in the dark and was not going to waste it standing at an altar in front of 300 people with phone cameras already raised and recording. "Walk," she said through her teeth. "Now." He walked. Of course he walked. He followed her like a man who had been waiting for exactly this, for her to reach for him again, even in fury. And the ease of it, the way he simply fell into step behind her like no time had passed at all, made her want to put her fist through the nearest wall. She found the coat room off the side corridor, shoved the door open, and pulled him through it. The door swung shut. The noise of the chapel. Julian's voice rising, her cousin's urgent whispers, 300 people trying to process what they had just witnessed, became muffled and distant. In here, there was only the smell of cedar and old wool and, underneath both, the faint sharp note of Chin Hai's cologne. The same one. 7 years, and he was still wearing the same one, and she despised herself for cataloging it before she had even opened her mouth. "You have about 30 seconds, she said, spinning to face him, "to explain what you think you just did out there before I call the police, the fire department, and anyone else I can reach." Chin Hai looked at her. Just looked at her. With that same devastating, unhurried attention that had undone her the first time. The attention of a man who had decided she was the only thing in the room worth seeing, and who had apparently not revised that assessment in 7 years. His jacket was still perfectly pressed. His breathing was completely even. He looked like a man who had strolled into a garden party. Not like a man who had just crashed a wedding with a private security detail and told the groom exactly what he was in front of 300 witnesses. 30 seconds is more than I need, he said. Don't. Her voice cracked on the word, and she hated that too. Hated the crack. Hated that he could still do that to her vocal cords from a standing start. Don't do that. Don't be calm right now. You don't get to be calm right now, Chin Hai. I know. You left. The words came out stripped of everything. The armor. The careful composure she had been assembling every single morning for 7 years. All of it gone at once. Just the raw, factual horror of it. You left me. You left me with... You just left. And you never called, and I had to figure out how to... She stopped. Pressed her fingers against her mouth. Pulled herself back from the edge by force. He has your jaw, she said quietly. Did you see that? Did you look at him? Yes. Something in his voice on that single word was different. Lower, more unguarded than anything she had heard from him. I looked at him. And? He crossed the room in 3 steps. Not rushing, just closing the distance like it was a fact he was correcting, an equation that had been wrong for too long. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her chin to hold his gaze, close enough that the cedar and the cologne were everything she could breathe. And she pressed back against the door behind her because her legs had made a decision her mind hadn't authorized. She told herself it was just proximity, just muscle memory. It wasn't. I have been looking at him, Chin-hai said, for 7 years. She opened her mouth. He kept going, his voice dropping lower. I know he lost his first tooth at 6. I know he came in second in the sprint relay at his school's field day last spring. I know he cried for 20 minutes the night your building's power went out, and then fell asleep in the living room with every candle you owned burning around him like a fort. He paused. I know everything, Jayla. I never stopped. The room was very small. He was very close. His hand came up slowly. Slowly. Enough that she could have moved, could have turned her head, could have chosen differently, and his thumb grazed her cheekbone. Just barely. The lightest possible contact, like a man who understood that he had forfeited the right to take more than that. I am never letting you go again, he said. I need you to hear that. Whatever you decide to do with it. She didn't answer. She was too busy reminding herself how to breathe in a space that had run critically short of oxygen. Here's what 300 wedding guests were about to learn about men like Chin-hai. When they walk back into a room after a conversation like that, the room already knows something has been decided. They don't have to say a word. The decision walks in with them. By the time they returned to the chapel, Julian had reorganized himself into something resembling composure. He was standing at the head of the aisle in his ivory tie and his family money posture, and when Chin-hai appeared in the doorway, Julian's eyes went cold in the specific way of a man who had decided that public humiliation was a variable he could manage. He was wrong. He just didn't know it yet. I don't know who you are, Julian said, loudly enough to carry, his voice holding the particular certainty of someone accustomed to rooms adjusting to him. But you have exactly 1 minute to remove yourself and your people from this venue before I have you escorted out. 300 people held their collective breath. Chin-hai looked at him. Not a threatening look. Something quieter. More final. The look of a man running a very brief calculation and arriving at the only answer that was ever available. Your family's East Side development loan, Chin-hai said, pleasantly. The way you mention the weather. Has been in default for 11 months. I acquired the debt this morning. The composure on Julian's face did something complicated and irreversible. Chin-hai had already looked away. He crossed the room toward the front, pew where Kaylin was standing, small and wide-eyed, still clutching the ring pillow, with Jayla's cousin gripping his shoulder and whispering something that was almost certainly the entirely wrong explanation for everything that was happening. Chin-hai stopped in front of his son. He crouched down to eye level, which put the most dangerous man in the room at the exact height of a 7-year-old in a crooked bow tie. And he looked at Kaylin with an expression that Jayla, watching from 10 feet away, had never seen on his face before. Something completely unguarded. Something that looked, terrifyingly, like awe. Your tie is crooked, Chin-hai said. Kaylin looked down at it, then back up with the serene confidence of a child who had decided this was not his problem. I know. Mama couldn't fix it. I can fix it. Okay, Kaylin said. Chin-hai straightened the tie, carefully, with both hands, and the chapel was so silent that the small sound of the fabric settling was audible 3 rows back. Then he stood and held out his hand. And Kaylin, because he was 7 years old and had not yet learned to be afraid of powerful men, took it without hesitation. Chin-hai looked at Jayla across the room. Are you ready? She wasn't. She was standing in a wedding gown in a chapel full of witnesses, holding the ruins of a plan she had spent 6 months building, and the man who had broken her into pieces was holding their son's hand and waiting for her with all the patience in the world. She picked up the hem of her dress. She walked toward them. She did not look at Julian. What does it mean in Korean culture when a powerful man publicly claims a child is heir? The weight of that declaration goes far deeper than most Western audiences realize, and it will matter enormously later in the story. She thought she had herself under control. She thought the worst of it. The shock, the fury, the vertigo of seeing his face again was already behind her. She was wrong. The hardest part wasn't the chapel. The hardest part was the silence afterward, moving through the city at night beside a man she had spent 7 years training herself not to need. The Maybach was black and silent and impossibly smooth. Kalen was asleep within 12 minutes, buckled between them, his head tipped sideways onto Jayla's arm, the ring pillow still loosely clutched in one small fist, as though his body had assessed the situation and concluded that unconsciousness was the most reasonable response available. Outside the tinted windows, the city moved past in amber and glass. The adrenaline from the chapel had burned off somewhere around the Brooklyn Bridge, and what replaced it felt very much like the specific exhaustion of a woman who had been bracing for impact for 7 years and had just run out of places to brace. Her hands were still. Her face was still. Inside, nothing was still at all. She was shivering. She hadn't noticed until Chin Hai did. He didn't say anything. He reached up, slid off his jacket with the unhurried efficiency of a man removing a piece of armor he no longer needed, and draped it across her shoulders. The weight of it settled warm and immediate. It smelled like him. She pulled it tighter and hated. Precisely, specifically hated. How natural that felt. She told herself it was just warmth. Just physics. The body seeking heat. It wasn't. The driver had not been given any instructions she had heard. The car was heading somewhere specific. She should have asked where. She hadn't asked. That told her something about herself that she filed away to examine later, when she had the capacity. Chin Hai was watching Kalen sleep. The expression on his face was the same one from the chapel. Unguarded, quiet. A man recalibrating the entire architecture of himself around a new and overwhelming fact. He's easy, Jayla said softly, so she wouldn't wake him. Always has been. Happy mostly. Asks about 100 questions so day, and he expects real answers. He'll know if you're giving him a placeholder. She paused. He asked me once why he looked different from the other kids at school. I told him he looked like his dad. He asked if his dad was handsome. What did you say? Chin Hai asked. She looked out the window. I said yes. Unfortunately. Chin Hai was quiet for a moment. Then his hand moved across the back seat, not toward her, just open, resting near hers. An offering, not a reach. A door left ajar. Jayla. Not yet, she said. Not in the car. Not while he's here. She looked at Kalen's sleeping face, the jawline, the lashes, the small miracle of him that her entire life had reorganized itself around. Whatever you have to say to me, it better be worth 7 years. His hand stayed where it was. Open. On the seat between them. Somewhere above the midtown skyline, without deciding to, she let the edge of her fingers rest against his. Just barely. Just enough. She made one critical error when she agreed to go up to his penthouse that night. She assumed that hearing the truth would make her angrier. She had prepared for that. She had not prepared for what it actually did. The penthouse was not what she expected, which, with him, had always meant it was exactly what she should have expected. Nothing excessive. Everything chosen with intention. Dark wood, clean geometry, floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city outside feel like a painting commissioned specifically for this room. No clutter. No performance. Just a space that looked like a man who had long ago decided that the only things worth keeping were the ones that served a purpose. One of his staff, a quiet woman who moved with the professional invisibility of someone very good at their job, materialized and showed Jayla to a guest room with a proper child's bed that was far too well prepared to be accidental. Someone had anticipated Kalen. Someone had thought about the size of the mattress, the softness of the blanket. That detail settled into Jayla's chest and stayed there. She tucked Kaylin in. She stood over him for a long moment. Then she went back out. Chin-Hai was at the windows, his back to her, a glass of water in his hand that he appeared to have no intention of drinking. He had loosened his collar. Without the jacket, without the architecture of the chapel performance, he looked like what he had always been underneath everything, exhausted. And privately so. He heard her. He turned. "Sit down," he said. She sat, not because he told her to, because her legs had finally submitted their resignation. He set the glass down. He turned to face her fully. And then something happened that she had only seen from him once before, in the blue light of an empty office years ago, when he had thought she was already gone and hadn't known she was standing in the doorway watching him. The composure came down. Not entirely, but enough. 7 years ago, he said, a rival, faction inside the syndicate found out about you. The room went very still. I had been careful. I believed I had been careful. But they had been watching for longer than I understood, and they had surveillance going back months. They sent me photographs of you, your apartment building, your morning route, the coffee shop you went to every Tuesday without fail. They were not subtle about what the photographs meant. Korean crime syndicates have a deeply specific internal code around personal relationships and perceived weakness. The idea that love is leverage, and leverage must be eliminated. Understanding this code is the key to understanding why Chin-Hai did what he did, and why he believed he had no other choice. They told me to end it, not gradually, a clean cut. If they believed for even a moment that you still mattered to me, they would use you. And the people that faction used did not come back from it. He said this without drama, the way you state a fact you have, accepted the full weight of. The only way to keep you alive was to make them believe you were nothing. That meant no calls, no letter, no trail of any kind that could ever be traced back to feeling. Jayla had her hands clasped in her lap. She was pressing her own knuckles hard enough to leave marks, because it was either that or come completely undone. And she had not come undone in 7 years, and she was not starting now. And the faction? She said. Gone. Simply stated. It took 4 years to dismantle every piece of it, every asset, every connection, every person who had ever said your name in that context. When it was finished, there was no one left who could reach you through me. He looked at her. And then I came back. To crash my wedding. To come back for my family. A beat. The wedding was a complication I found out about 3 weeks ago. Of course you did. Jayla. I spent a year waiting for you to call, she said, her voice dropping to something very quiet and very controlled. I spent that year pregnant, which you apparently did not know. And then I spent the next 6 years raising our son and telling myself that whatever happened to you was not my business anymore. I built a whole life. I built it on the conviction that I was doing it completely alone. She looked at him directly. And you're sitting here telling me I was never actually alone. No, he said. You were never alone. She looked at him for a long time across the width of the room. I need to sleep, she said. He nodded. He didn't push. He stood when she stood, and when she moved toward the hallway, he said her name once, the way he used to say it in empty offices at the end of long nights, the same tone, 7 years gone and completely intact. She stopped walking. She didn't turn. I'm sorry, he said. No additions, no qualifications. She went to bed. Here's what Jayla didn't know. What she couldn't have known, because knowing would have unraveled the story she'd needed to tell herself to survive. The life she'd built alone wasn't entirely her own construction. The ground she'd stood on had been reinforced, quietly and from a distance, by a man who had given up the right to stand next to her, but had never given up the responsibility. She found them at 6:30 in the morning, She had woken from a dream she couldn't hold on to, something warm and formless that dissolved the moment she opened her eyes, and lay in the dark listening to Kaylin's even breathing from the next room. Then she had gotten up, still in borrowed clothes, the wedding dress hanging on the back of the guest room door like a verdict in white silk, and gone to find coffee. The kitchen faced east. The light coming in was the pale gold of very early morning, the kind that makes everything look temporary and a little sacred. She found the mugs, she found the espresso machine, and on the counter beside it she found a leather portfolio lying open. She almost didn't look. She was reaching for a mug when her own name caught her eye on the top page. Monroe, J. Career Development Fund, active. She put the mug down. The documents were not hidden. They were not locked away or tucked into a drawer. They were sitting in the open on the counter of a kitchen she had never been in before last night, which meant either he had left them there deliberately and somehow this was the more devastating possibility. They were so much a part of the ordinary fabric of his life that he simply hadn't thought to move them before she woke up. She sat down and read. 7 years of it. Itemized and documented and utterly, mercilessly quiet. The promotion at her second job. The one that had come through 2 weeks after she'd submitted an application she was certain was too senior for her. There was a name in these pages, a third party, a single discreet phone call. The luxury building she had moved into when Kaylin was 2, the one whose rent had always felt slightly too reasonable for the address. There was a number here, a monthly differential, silently covered every single month for 5 years, and Kaylin's school. The scholarship that had arrived from nowhere when he was 4, the one that had made her cry alone at her kitchen table because she hadn't been able to figure out who to thank. She had thanked the universe. She had thought she was lucky. She sat with the documents for a long time. The morning light moved and didn't care. She heard him before she saw him, the quiet sound of a man who moved through spaces like he was trying not to disturb them. He appeared in the doorway in a dark shirt, no jacket, and stopped when he saw her at the counter. His eyes went to the portfolio. He didn't reach for it. He didn't try to minimize it. "How long have you been awake?" he asked. "Long enough," she said. "I didn't want you to feel watched," he said, from the doorway. "I need to be clear about that. It was never surveillance. I couldn't be there, so I did what I could from the only distance I had. You paid for his entire education." "Yes." "You negotiated my promotion." "I made one call." She looked at him, chin high. "You built my life." "I protected your life," he said quietly. "There is a difference. Every decision you made, every morning you got up and chose to keep going, every wall you built and every one you tore down, that was entirely you. I just made sure the floor didn't give way while you were doing it." She didn't answer. She looked at the portfolio for a long moment. Then, carefully and without drama, she closed it. She stood up. She got her mug. She poured the coffee. And when she turned back to the counter, she pushed the second mug toward him. No words, no ceremony, and watched him cross the kitchen to take it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an answer to any of the questions still stacked between them. But it was coffee in the early morning, in a kitchen with a city waking outside and a 7-year-old sleeping down the hall. And for right now, it was a beginning. She thought the worst of it was behind her. She thought the chapel had been the peak of the crisis, the dramatic high point that everything else would slope down from. That was the thing about Julian. He was predictable in most ways, but in the ways that mattered, she had fundamentally misread him. Safe men, it turned out, could be very dangerous when their ego was the thing at stake. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Jayla had been at the penthouse for 4 days by then, not because she had decided anything, but because Kaylin had discovered Chin Hai owned a chess set with hand-carved obsidian pieces and had declared, with the absolute authority of a 7-year-old who had found something he wanted, that he was not leaving until he learned how to play every piece correctly. Jayla had looked at her son's face, bright and engaged and completely at home in a space he had never been in before, and found that she didn't have the heart to interrupt it. She was in the study when the assistant brought it in. Cream-colored, heavy. The name of the Whitmore Group embossed on the upper left corner. The kind of lawyers that families like Julian's kept on permanent retainer, specifically for moments when their pride needed institutional backing. She opened it standing up. She read it, standing up. She stayed standing for about 30 seconds after she finished, and then sat down very slowly and read it again, because the first time she had apparently failed to fully register that this was real. Julian was filing for emergency custody of Kaylin. The grounds were meticulous. They had been prepared well in advance of the wedding. She could tell by the precision of the language, the depth of the documentation, which told her everything she needed to know about when he had started planning for the contingency of being publicly humiliated. Unfit environment. Association with known criminal enterprise. Emotional instability as evidenced by public conduct. Clean, surgical, designed to wound at every angle. He was also moving to freeze her personal accounts. Citing. Her eyes caught the phrase and something cold moved through her entire chest. Undisclosed financial relationships with organized crime figures. He had taken every fear she had ever carried about this situation and built a legal document around it. She folded the papers back into the envelope. She set it on the desk. She went to find Kaylin, who was in the living room arguing passionately with Chin Hai's assistant about the correct behavior of a knight. She sat beside him and watched him play and said nothing about the envelope for the rest of the day. She was very good at carrying things quietly. She had years of practice. It was the silence that unraveled her. Kaylin went to sleep easily, the way he always did, like a child whose internal weather was fundamentally settled, who trusted that the world would be there in the morning. The penthouse went quiet around her. Chin Hai had taken a call after dinner and disappeared into his office, and Jayla had sat with a book she wasn't reading for an hour before she gave up and went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She stood at the counter. The city outside the window was its nighttime self, amber and distant. All the noise filtered out to something almost peaceful at this height. And then, without any warning at all, the thing she had been holding together since the chapel simply came apart. It wasn't loud. It never was with her. She had never been the kind of woman who fell apart at volume. It was the quiet kind, the kind that's worse. Shoulders dropping first, then one hand pressing flat on the counter, the other covering her mouth because even alone in a kitchen at 2 a.m, she did not want to make noise with her own grief. But the tears came regardless. And once they started, she couldn't locate the place where they ended, because it wasn't just the lawsuit. It was 7 years compressed into a single moment. The wedding dress in the guest room, the scholarship documents in a leather portfolio. Kaylin's face when a stranger crouched down and fixed his tie with both hands, all of it arriving at once, in a kitchen, at 2 a.m, because she had simply run out of room to keep it organized and separate and managed. She didn't hear him come in. She only knew he was there when the quality of the silence changed, the specific, unmistakable shift of a room that now contained him. And she straightened fast, turned away, pulled herself back from the edge with both hands. "Don't," he said quietly. "You don't have to do that. I'm fine. Jayla. I'm fine, I just—" Her voice broke cleanly in half and she stopped, pressing her fingers harder against her mouth, furious at herself and at him and at the kettle that had chosen this exact moment to begin. Its soft, oblivious whistle. He crossed the kitchen. He didn't reach for her face. He didn't try to turn her toward him or fold her into an embrace she hadn't invited. Instead, slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who understood that some moments require a completely different language, he sank to his knees on the kitchen floor in front of her. His hands came to rest gently on either side of her hips, not gripping, not demanding. And he pressed his face against her stomach. Just that. the way a man presses his forehead to the ground when he has run out of words for the magnitude of what he carries. She went completely still. "I know what I took from you," he said, his voice low and stripped of everything except the plain truth of it, pressed into the fabric of her borrowed shirt. "I know there is no version of an explanation that gives those years back. I know you were afraid every single day and you kept going anyway. I know the lawsuit is my fault, because I came back, because I disrupted the life you built. And Julian is doing this because of me." A pause, weighted and complete. "I know all of it. And I am asking you, not telling you, asking, to let me fix the part that can still be fixed. Not because you need me to, because I need to." She looked down at him, the most powerful man she had ever known, on his knees on a kitchen floor at 2 a.m, not performing anything, not calculating an outcome, just honest, in the way that only people who have completely exhausted every other option manage to be. Her hand moved before she thought about it. She set her fingers lightly on the back of his head, barely touching, barely there. "Okay," she said. One word. In the particular dark of that kitchen, at that hour, it carried everything. She slept. She did not know what he did after she went to bed, and she would not ask until later. She would piece it together from fragments over the following days. A call at 3 a.m, to a number in Seoul, a second call to a financial firm in Singapore, a third to someone whose name she would never learn. She would find out that by the time the sun came up over Manhattan, Julian's family's primary holding company had been quietly acquired by a shell entity that traced back, after considerable effort by several different lawyers, to a firm belonging to Chin Hai. She would find out that the East Side Development loan had only been the first position, that there were 4 others, 2 regulatory reviews that had been dormant but were no longer, and 1 extremely specific letter delivered to Julian's father's private club by a courier at 7:45 in the morning. She would find out that Chin Hai had not made a single threat. Not one. No muscle. No implied violence. Nothing that could be characterized as intimidation in any legal document, because men like Chin Hai understood that brute force was for people who hadn't mastered patience. He had used money and time and the methodical precision of a man who had spent 7 years learning exactly how to take apart the things that threatened what he loved. By the time Kalen woke up and announced his intention to have pancakes, specifically triangles, not squares, squares were wrong, Julian's legal team had filed to withdraw the custody motion. Chin Hai told her over breakfast, briefly, without ceremony, "The way you mention the weather is expected to clear." She looked at him across the table. He was cutting Kalen's pancakes into triangles with the focused attention of a man taking the geometry seriously. "All of it?" she said. "All of it," he confirmed. Kalen looked between them with the bright, cataloging eyes of a child who understood that something significant had just passed between the adults and had decided to file it away. "Can I have more syrup?" he asked. "No," said Jayla. "Yes," said Chin Hai at the exact same moment. Kalen grinned the grin of a boy who had just discovered something very useful about the structure of his new family. She thought she needed him there. She didn't. But the moment he walked through that glass door, not for her protection, not because she had called him, but because he had simply made a decision that wherever she was going, he was going too. She understood something she hadn't fully understood before. This was what it looked like when someone refused to let you face things alone. Not because they doubted you, because they loved you. The call came 2 days later. Julian's lawyer, precisely neutral in tone, requesting that Jayla come to the Harrington Club to sign a mutual release, a clean legal severance of all claims and counterclaims. The careful neutrality of the message told her everything she needed to know about how badly the last week had gone for Julian. Chin Hai told her not to go. Jayla went anyway. She went because she was not the kind of woman who sent other people to close her conversations. She went in a cream blazer and flat shoes, with the specific posture of a woman who had decided that today she was not going to be afraid of a single thing. The Harrington Club was old money-made architectural, mahogany paneling, carpets that absorbed sound. The specific hush of an institution that had been charging substantial sums for the privilege of feeling important for well over a century. Julian was in a private room off the east corridor, behind glass walls that looked out onto a garden that had no idea what it was witnessing. He was already seated, a document on the table, a pen beside it. He looked terrible in the specific way of a man whose armor is still intact, but whose face has stopped cooperating with it. The suit was still correct. The posture was still deliberate. But behind his eyes there was something that hadn't been there before the chapel. The permanent bruise of a man who had spent his entire life believing his family name was a form of protection and had just finished discovering what it was worth against a different kind of power entirely. "This is straightforward," his lawyer said, not looking at her. "Sign and everything is concluded." Jayla looked at the document. Then she looked at Julian. "You were going to take my son," she said. Julian said nothing. "You were going to use Kaylin as a legal instrument because I embarrassed you in front of people whose opinion you value. That's the whole of it." She kept her voice completely even. Quiet. "The way you speak, when you no longer need volume to carry weight. I want you to carry that with you. I want you to know exactly what kind of man that decision made you." "Jayla, I'm not finished." She picked up the pen. "I'm signing this because I want it concluded. Not for you. Not because of anything you filed or threatened. Because I am done giving you one more minute of my attention." She signed. She set the pen down. She stood. The glass wall of the office vibrated. Not dramatically. Just the faint physical tremor of a room adjusting to pressure from outside it. The door opened. Chin Hae walked in, two men behind him stopping at the threshold without being asked. Dark suit, no tie, and he did not look at Julian at all. He crossed the room directly to Jayla, removed his jacket in one motion and settled it across her shoulders. The same gesture every time, like a language they had developed before either of them had words for it. Then he turned her gently toward him, one hand against her jaw, and looked at her face the way you examine something precious for damage. Satisfied, he turned, reached past her, and dropped a leather folder onto the desk in front of Julian. "The Harrington Club," he said pleasantly to the room, "is under new management as of this morning. I'd suggest clearing out by end of day." Julian stared at the folder. Chin Hae put his arm around Jayla's shoulders. In a voice low enough that only she could hear, his mouth near her temple, the words barely sound. He said, "You didn't need me here." "I know," she said, "but I needed to be here." She let herself lean into him. Just slightly. Just enough. The way you lean into something you have decided, finally, to trust with your weight. "Kaylin is your heir," she said softly as they moved toward the door. "You said that in front of witnesses." "I know." "He's going to have questions. A lot of them." "I know." She could feel him almost smile against her hair. "I'm ready for approximately 100 of them." She pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders. They walked out of the Harrington Club together into the clean afternoon light, and neither of them looked back at what they were leaving behind. In Korean inheritance culture, being publicly named as a man's sole heir is not merely sentimental. It's a declaration with legal and social consequences that ripple through an entire network. What Chin Hae said in that room meant something very specific to every Korean person who eventually heard about it. And people heard about it. She almost said no, not to him, but to herself. She almost talked herself out of it the way she had talked herself into Julian. Methodically, sensibly, with a list of reasons that all looked reasonable on paper and amounted to nothing in the actual presence of feeling. She had spent so long confusing safety with smallness that she had almost made a permanent decision based on a temporary fear. She didn't. That was the whole of her arc. The whole of what she had become. A woman who finally stopped choosing the lesser thing. Months passed. The kind of months that do not announce themselves. That arrive as ordinary days and only reveal their significance once they are already part of the past. There were conversations in the dark, and there were mornings where the old wound ached and she said so without apology, and Chin-hai listened without defending himself, just carrying whatever part of it she needed, someone else to hold for a while. There were also mornings that were simply mornings. Coffee and the newspaper and Kalen narrating his dreams in elaborate detail at the breakfast table, as though dictating a series of field reports. Those mornings felt like something she hadn't known she had been missing until she had it back. Kalen learned chess. He was, as it turned out, extremely good at it, which Chin-hai received with the quiet, solemn pride of a man who had expected nothing less and was deeply relieved to be correct. He also learned over the course of those months that his father did not believe in losing at anything, that his mother could out-argue virtually every person alive and had never once needed anyone else to do it for her, and that having two people who loved you with the force of an absolute conviction, not a performance of it, but the real structural thing, was something you felt in your body before you ever put words to it. Jayla took her time. She had always taken her time. She let it build the way real things build, out of accumulated ordinary days, without pressure, without performance. When it was ready, she knew. The knowing was quiet and complete, the way certainty always is when it actually belongs to you. He told her 3 weeks before what he was planning to do, and he asked, again, not told, asked, whether she was ready. She sat with it for 2 days. Then she went to his study, found him at his desk, and told him yes. They flew on a Tuesday. Just the three of them. No staff visible, no press, no guests. Though she understood by now that truly alone was a concept that applied differently to their life, and she had made her peace with it. The island was small and private and warm in the way of places that have never had to announce themselves. White sand that looked almost silver in early morning light. Water so clear it seemed implausible, like something rendered rather than real. A horizon that continued until it became indistinguishable from sky. Kalen found a tide pool within 4 minutes of landing and issued a formal declaration of residency. Jayla sat on the sand and watched him, the sun already warm on her arms, her shoes abandoned somewhere behind her. Chin-hai sat beside her. They watched their son conduct an extended diplomatic negotiation with a crab about the boundaries of a shared territory, with the focused energy of someone who considered the outcome genuinely uncertain. After a while, Chin-hai reached into his shirt pocket. No production, no staging. He set the ring in his open palm, a single clean diamond, no excess, exactly the way he did everything that actually mattered, and held it between them, low and quiet. Like a question asked in a normal voice in the middle of an ordinary morning. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I know. I have been trying to write one for 2 months." "I know that too." He looked at her, the composed face, the careful eyes, and, underneath both of those, entirely visible to anyone who knew how to look, everything he was and everything he was asking her for. "Jayla," he said, "you are the only family I have ever built toward. The only person I have ever been afraid of losing. I spent 7 years making sure you were safe from a distance, and what I understand now, what I didn't understand when I was young enough to think distance was the same as protection, is that safe is not something you create by staying away. Safe is what I want to be for you. Present. Every day. In the same room. Close enough that if something comes, I am already there." He paused. "I would like the chance to be that. If you'll let me." She looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She looked at Kalen, who had abandoned the crab negotiation and was now sprinting toward them at full speed with wet feet, and an expression of absolute, undisguised excitement, because he had spotted the ring from 20 feet away and had determined that this moment required his immediate and complete physical presence. "Yes," Kaylin announced, arriving like a small, joyful collision. She says yes. Mama, say yes. I already knew at breakfast. I could tell. Kaylin. I'm just saying what everyone already knows. Jayla looked at her son. She looked at the man beside her who was losing a battle with a smile he had no intention of winning. She looked at the ring, and the water, and the silver sand, and the wide, clean morning that asked nothing of her except to be fully present in it. She held out her hand. Chin-Hai slid the diamond onto her finger, carefully, with both hands. The same focused attention he had given a crooked bow tie on a day that now felt like the first sentence of something she was finally ready to finish reading. Kaylin threw himself between them with the force of a small, complete, irreversible love. Chin-Hai caught him with one arm and pulled Jayla in with the other, and for a long moment the three of them stayed like that on the sand, tangled together, warm and real and entirely, permanently theirs. The water came up around their feet, cool and unhurried. The sun kept rising. The horizon held in every direction, as far as she could see. She had wanted an unbreakable family. She had wanted it so badly that she had almost settled for a reasonable imitation of one. A man who was fine. A life that was adequate. A version of safety that asked nothing of her, and gave nothing real in return. This was not an imitation. This was the actual thing, complicated and late, and completely, absolutely hers. Subscribe to see how this unfolds. And comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you. Just